Hello, everybody. My name's Zoe Bedford. I run a healthcare consultancy called ZPB Associates. I set it up 9 years ago because I was really interested in how we could try and foster more collaborative partnerships between the different parts of the healthcare system. So whether that be private sector, public sector, third sector, etc. And what I'm talking about today is a little bit around the sort of the current reorganisation that's going through the NHS at the moment. Before I start, it would be really helpful if I could have a show of hands. Is there anyone here currently working in or for the NHS? Fabulous. In medical roles, management roles? Yeah, great. And everyone else is from industry? Is that okay? Great. I'm going to do a real sort of rattle through. There's not very many of us, so hopefully you can. There'll be time for a sort of Q&A or something at the end. But if there's something that crops up and you want to talk about, just pop your hand up and we can go from there. So I just really wanted to start off with saying that the NHS is actually an incredibly efficient system. It's not something you often hear. We spend a lot of time giving it a lot of hard press about how inefficient and money-wise, etc. But what we can see here is actually, comparatively speaking, the UK spends very little money per head on healthcare, certainly in comparison to the US. And actually overall, the UK scores pretty well in comparison to other countries. So what you can see here is across the number of quality metrics and access metrics and efficiency metrics, the UK and therefore by default the NHS is doing pretty well. That having been said, we can't stop fiddling with it, we can't stop playing around with it. And really what I'm just trying to illustrate here is that there's been an awful lot of reorganisation and restructure and shuffling around of the healthcare system over the last 6 years. Largely due to what happened back in 2012 with the Health and Social Care Act, which was well intended in its attempt to give more control back to clinicians, but it was incredibly poorly executed and poorly communicated. And everything that's really kind of happened since has been really trying to work out how we can try and refit together the system that got really sort of fragmented back then. But the problem that the NHS has is that it's constantly organising itself around itself. It's traditionally been set up around its institutions, and for a lot of people that is around hospital care systems. And any other business or any other industry, if you organise your business around, if a supermarket didn't organise itself around its customers, then it would probably go out of business pretty quickly. And that is kind of what has been sort of a lot of the problems recently. So what is happening at the moment is the NHS is trying to reorganise itself around populations and around its patients. Or I say the NHS, I mean NHS England really. And what we're in the middle of is perhaps one of the biggest moves to try and transform a national health system into an integrated care system. So what that means is, and I'm sure you'll all be very familiar with a lot of this, but in 2016, we had 211 CCGs. In 2016, we were introduced to STPs. In 2018, we were then introduced to integrated care systems. And what is happening here is an integrated care system is basically where NHS organisations are partnering up with the local councils, local authorities and other bodies within a particular area and trying to manage all the resources and deliver the care across the whole population that it serves. Broadly speaking, there are sort of 5 rules of thumb with what is happening at the moment. One is really trying to focus on service improvements and outcomes, not just on the administrative constructs, which have been a legacy of how the NHS has evolved over the last 70 years. There's a real sort of emphasis on co-producing strategies, so working with local populations, working with networks, working with clinicians, working with local authorities to try and really sew up everything from health and social care. What we're really seeing is a real sort of devolution of power from Whitehall back into the NHS, into local areas. And I've called this sort of horses for courses. There is no one-size-fits-all model, and what that means is that actually in an attempt to reorganise a very fragmented system, it's actually becoming even more fragmented. It's very hard to navigate. There's no sort of consistency there. It's really important this is an evolution. This is not something that's just going to happen overnight. We're not going to have another legislative change. And so what we're seeing is a gradual sort of changing of what's going on. And the other rule, which is directed sort of coming out of NHS England, is let's find the good leadership, let's support that. It's not always NHS. We shouldn't always be thinking about NHS. Consider third sector and consider local government. So you're seeing, particularly with Manchester and Surrey, devolution around there. These are the main sort of priorities of which the NHS is facing at the moment. And as you can see, there's still really an emphasis, a lot of the activity and a lot of the emphasis is still really around the provider activity. So the changing role of acutes and reducing capacity, improving productivity and reducing variation. Again, that's very much around clinical and operational systems and providers. And there's a big emphasis on reconfiguration and specialised services. So moving into sort of specialised services. And you're seeing that this is sort of, say in South West London, they're seeking to cut inpatient beds by over 40%. They're trying to reduce outpatient appointments. We are seeing the reconfiguration. The sort of most obvious example is where they're trying to downgrade A&E into urgent care centres and centralising stroke and neuro rehab services. So there's a huge amount of activity going on, as you can obviously see. Technology is a major enabler here as well. So I'm sure you will all be aware that there's £4.2 billion has been ring-fenced for the tech transformation of the NHS, and this has all got to be divested and flowed into the system by 2020. And these are the kind of the main thrusts of what that's going to be spending on. The real sort of bottleneck really is around infrastructure, because actually currently the tech and the infrastructure is what is really holding some of this back. Some really basic things like getting Wi-Fi into GP practices needs to happen first. And I heard in your previous talking, I think there was a talk on population health management and obviously all the challenges there are about trying to integrate the different data sets. So real sort of emphasis on tech as an enabler here. There are lots of different challenges, lots and lots of challenges, as you can imagine. But and here is just some of the ones which sort of throw up most frequently. The impact on the evidence around the reconfiguration is mixed at the moment. There is a lot of evidence around trauma and stroke and vascular. That's making it quite hard in some areas. The financial impact is again, the sort of jury is out on there. There's a lot of money being put into the system, but at the moment it's very hard to see where that is going to be, where the costs are going to be saved through. There are the major reconfiguration, the changes that are going through at the moment, all need formal consultation with the public, and that's causing real delays. And also it's very, very difficult in a lot of instances where there's a lot of competing interests and you're trying to get organisations which historically have actually sort of competed for patients and for funds are now having to work together. And we hear an awful lot about there is a lot of sustainability going on and not enough transformation. And that is again because there's a huge challenge in the provider sector and there's a huge deficit. And so a lot of the money is sort of being used to sort of prop up that and plug that. And then at the bottom I've just put this thing about the clash of the plans. It's extraordinary. This is a real sort of challenge at the moment, which is we've got the budgets come out, then there's the NHS 10-year plan, which is due to be coming out in Monday, I believe. And then you've got Matt Hancock, the new Secretary of State, who has also published his own plan. So it's very confusing, the sort of the policy landscape. But I'm an optimist. I think what's different about this kind of restructure and this reorganisation that we're going through at the moment is that actually the government has less of a focus on the NHS, which perhaps means that we can get on with the job. Brexit has caused all sorts of problems, but what it has done is actually allowed the NHS and NHS England to make some fairly tricky decisions without number 10 and Whitehall being sort of hovering over too much. the unthinkable is now thinkable. So things which previously would have been sort of political suicide, such as allowing waiting lists to increase, but they have accepted that, and that's something that Simon Stevens has been doing. It's understanding that actually, as the system is transforming, there are going to have to be a number of, it's always quite a sort of a painful transformation. The message has come out, it's very clear that there is no plan B. The NHS has to transform, has to move itself into patient population and into population health management. It has to move itself into a more integrated care system. There is no more money. The money that is going in is going into social care, primary care, and mental health. And the other thing which I think is quite different here is that the Prime Minister is going to hold her line, although it's questionable whether she'll actually hang on to her job for that much longer. On the horizon, I think what we are seeing is there's going to have to be a sort of a conversation about rationing. It's something which has been really, really controversial. It's something which is a very unpalatable discussion that needs to be had with the public, but I think it's happening anyway within the NHS. There are going to be, I think we'll see some fairly controversial choices about service and provider reconfiguration. We already know that that again is a very difficult one to have with the public. People like their hospitals, they like having an A&E on their doorstep, and that's not necessarily always an easy one to have. I think we'll see more cuts in public health spending and prevention. But I think what we will see is that STPs and ICSs will start gathering more momentum, they'll have greater authority, much more of the decision making will be happening at a local level rather than in London. And then obviously we have this long-term plan which is meant to be coming out next week. In terms of what this means for industry and for the world as a whole, we're seeing these new geographical areas emerging, and we're likely to see a reduction in the number of commissioners. We're seeing that already. We're getting this sort of uber super CCGs, where 6 or 7 CCGs are now coming together. They've got shared executive teams, they've got shared commissioning functions. So I think that will bring some new arrangements in. I think we will also be seeing some cuts that are going to be made to the number of beds into A&E departments. And the other thing I think which will be, which we all sort of need to be mindful of really, is around the move towards outcomes-based contracting and to longer-term contracts. So we're hearing a lot more about capitated contracts, risk share, gain share. So rather than just moving forward to these very straightforward binary contracts and seeing, actually, let's make this much more outcome-based. What are we all trying to achieve here? How can we measure this? And then obviously this huge move towards becoming much more of a data-centric and data-led organisation and world. And NHS England has been very clear that it's looking for independent data that helps prove and guide clinical and operational decision making. So I think things to consider. 18 months ago we had 211 commissioners. At the moment it's somewhere between 211 and 44 commissioners. I think ICSs, we will see, are going to be partnering with third-party experts. This is, again, that's something that's come out of NHS England, looking for really strong, really rigorous population health management capabilities, which is something which is actually relatively new. I think we're seeing there's not necessarily a consistent understanding about what specialised commissioning is and what the approaches are to that. And then also in all of this, there are some really sort of gargantuan systemic pressures and targets that are going to continue to dominate. And then finally, because I've had my 5-minute warning, I just wanted to end on this, which is that actually there is this well-known thing about actually if you have, in times of stress, in times of difficulty, actually that's where some of the most interesting innovations and come from. And I believe actually that we are facing probably the best opportunity we've had to make some real transformational changes to the way the healthcare system is organised. We can organise it around patients, we can organise it around populations. That does require difficult decisions, but the fact that actually we've got the politicians looking over there means that actually the healthcare system can get on and organise itself in the way that it knows it needs to. So I'm going to leave it there. That was a real sort of potted history and run through of things. I don't know if anyone's got any questions or anything like that. No? Okay. Great, thank you.